already, acceded to this obligation. So that failure to put the obligations of the state in that term weakens the link between violence against women and the obligations of the state. And so the cumulative effect of these omissions is it transforms the convention from being this very exciting opportunity and moment to have a legally transformative instrument and turns it into almost a soft law document, right? Unenforceable. We can't use it tangibly as rights holders. And therefore, the ability of this convention to effectively protect women is called into question. Those are just a few of the legal issues that we highlight in our very robust legal analysis that if you're interested in, you can look at aucvawg, aucevawg.org, where we have the robust analysis for you to take a look at. Part of the question that May had asked me was to speak about the consultations that happened in Kenya. And part of this consultation surfaced what the issues that I'm speaking to are. However, these consultations were not widely, these consultations, I think, have happened in two phases. One happened before the convention was adopted, which we can't really speak to because we were not involved. A huge population of women's rights organizations, individuals were not involved in the consultations that happened on the draft treaty. And even those who were involved were not given the text of the treaty to look at, which is common practice. You must unveil the text of the treaty for people to engage with and then give you feedback on that. What was taken was proposals. What do you want to see in the treaty? So that is not how consultations should happen. And then consultations after the adoption continue to happen, and the sentiment overwhelmingly was that states must take into account existing frameworks and all the analysis that I have mentioned before. And therefore, what we are saying with some firmness in this convening is that we need to pause this question of ratification. Let's take a look at the convention. Let's unpack what the gaps are. Let's strengthen the provisions of the treaty and then ratify so that we're giving effect to a document that can actually be enforced, and we are actively working towards the prevention and response of violence against women. Thank you, May, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Jane, for this presentation where you highlighted some of the key issues that we have identified with
Yeah.
the convention, some of the key gaps, and the possible impacts of the weak treaty structure, as well as its failure to recognize legal entitlement. Thank you so much. Building on the context of the consultation that took place in Kenya, I'm inviting our next speaker, Elizabeth. She is from FIDA, Uganda. They have also engaged in national level consultations, and she will also just highlight the consultation process, some of the key recommendations, main concerns and challenges that they have faced. Over to you, Elizabeth.
All right, thank you very much. Please just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
We can hear
I
you
just
in the
want to
room.
make sure that I'm being heard. Okay, I do hope that I am loud and clear. Please, I can continue.
Please continue. We can hear you loud and clear in the room, and we can
Okay.
also hear you online.
Thank you very much first for the opportunity to engage in this particular space. I want it to start as a feedback of a coordination. It's not just this particular presser, but also generally the work around ensuring that African feminists and groups and NGOs are actually engaged in the process. So I think that's what really meaningful collaborations look like, and that's what really sisterhood is about. So thank you very much. One, I want to begin by saying, and very clearly, that our experience, our not very long experience in engaging with this convention, I'd like to clearly state that the Ugandan feminist movement, the Uganda NGO, women movement, is excited and is looking forward to the convention. It's something that we do support. This is extremely something that is important for us in the work that we do, because our engagement in this particular convention is also being coordinated through the Ministry of Gender and Local Gender, Labour and Social Development, which has been doing an amazing job to let us into that process. So Ugandan NGOs welcome this particular the objectives of the convention and are excited about this particular innovation. However, our consultation in Uganda also reached very interesting, what I could call interesting conclusions. One, of course, one of the things that came out very strongly was the fact that the effectiveness of any treaty must not only be made on some issues, but also on the quality of its development and legal foundations. At FIDA, we are lawyers because we do have a legal foundation, and therefore things to do with legal drafting and how the law works, and how you can use the law as a tool of social development are things that are important to us as a constituent practitioner. But I'm not only just thinking from from the FIDA's perspective. Many NGOs that were part of this consultation process were extremely eager to see that it's development, the quality, and that it's rooted in the legal foundation. And other recommendations were not intended to be the process, and I'm very glad to hear that that also come out very clearly. We're not here to give an approach, we're not here to, we're here to propose that we pause just to make sure that we are moving in the right direction and that the convention serves indeed the purpose that it's meant to serve, especially for today's context for we, the Ugandan women that we serve. Of course, our first area was, like the previous speaker, was around meaningful consultation. A lot of civil society had never or heard about it in rumor, but the ministry, for instance, in the beginning, did not have any consultations with civil society. And I think that's extremely dangerous for us in our context in Uganda, where we see that a lot of actions towards addressing violence against women, including the newer forms of violence against women, like technology facilitated violence, being part of the work that we have been supporting the government on. So we do feel, and many NGOs on the consultation mentioned that there could have been more that had been done on ensuring that there's consultation for different suppliers, for women's rights organizations, to make sure that we are representing the uniqueness of the different groups of women that the movement represents. And then another very interesting thing that we got from the consultation was concerns around, the legal scrutiny, and this is something that I've just touched also. We find that ratification of such documents, of such policy, of such a convention transforms a political commitment into a binding legal obligation, and it is therefore very critical that member states, excuse me, satisfy themselves that the convention is legally coherent and enforceable and fully aligns with what is already existing in our African context and then in our national contexts, in comparison with what's happening internationally. We're looking at the standards that are set at the international level. So we find that it's extremely important that the convention does not water down the protection that is even already included in our policies at the national level. It then doesn't serve the purpose for which it is intended to serve. The other thing that's important for us to note from our consultation in Uganda is that there are many issues that different individual women's rights activists and NGOs forwarded for further attention. One was the issue of having a convention anchoring itself within the establishment of the framework of the Maputo human rights instruments, and I know my sister did speak about it before. And we are saying that from our experience, and many women's rights organizations did say this in the consultations, that when such obligations are stated boldly, in very aspirational language, rather than, precise legal duties that are capable of supporting accountability, then it doesn't serve the purpose. That if something presents a legal responsibility, and then it should be clear. What does accountability look like? What does implementation look like? How do we stay accountable to each other as citizens that have a social contract with our government? The consultation also identified the substantive gaps in the treatment of violence against women and girls. A lot of the women were saying we need a stronger and more explicit provisions on domestic violence and tech-facilitated violence that my sister did speak about. The issue of femicides also came out right here in Uganda, because we've had a season since the last UPR cycle where femicides were a very commonplace right here in Uganda. Trafficking, which is a very common violation that a lot of Ugandan women, especially those between the ages 15 and 25, are currently struggling with the harmful practices. And then, so it's important that the intersecting factors that make women's lives unique. Yes, please. Hello.
Please proceed, Elizabeth.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you very much. Lastly, but not in any way least on this, and then I'll just read out 2, 3 main recommendations that did come up very strongly. Outside the fact that there were research that did that many members did speak about, a lot of the NGOs back home also questioned whether the proposed monitoring arrangements are sufficiently independent, and then if they will be adequately resourced and technically equipped to oversee the implementation of such an important treaty. We felt that it was important for us to pause and again realign and make sure that the monitoring arrangements that are available are independent, and that they fit the importance of this treaty and the problem that it's trying to address. There were several recommendations, but just allow me to mention about 3 that perhaps came out very uniquely for us. Many of them did agree to the fact that we really indeed need to pause and get back to the drawing board and ensure we address a lot of these things. And I'm so glad to see many of the African NGOs and feminists back in this particular campaign right now. And a big shout out to Isla for that. Secondly, an inclusive national consultation process will be very necessary. For instance, we found that the disability movement, women that work with sex workers, women that are working with children, NGOs that are working with children, were not anywhere in the process. And girl children are some of the biggest sufferers of this problem that we are talking about. And therefore, it's important that for us, there's a national consultation, and one that is led by government with NGOs complementing that role. And this is our recommendation because of the legal responsibility that is coming from this treaty. We need the government to take the lead while we take the complementary role, so that we do not then encourage a very common trend in Africa where the government has relegated the implementation part of delivery in their countries. And then thirdly, there's an issue around transparent and the participatory process of member states to ensure that citizens are able to, one, engage with their states on which commitments and which provisions make most sense, prioritization, to ensure that we are not backing a process or a treaty that will again gather dust on the shelves of many of these agencies that we work with. And I will not belabor the point on due diligence obligations that my sister did speak about, but by and large, the Ugandan NGO and feminist movement is excited about the idea, is excited about the collective voice of many of us in Africa to challenge ourselves and to challenge the AU to pause and listen to African women once more. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We appreciate your contribution, highlighting the recommendations from the consultation that took place in Uganda, and also why stakeholders support stronger, not weaker protections. Coming up next, we have Mona Lisa Daniele. She is a director of Mulao Matters from Botswana. She will take us through the consultation that took place at the national level with civil society in Botswana, the concerns that were raised by the participants, as well as the areas needing revision and why meaningful consultation really matters. Over to you, Mona Lisa.
Thank you very much and good morning. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
So the process in Botswana really started off with CSOs in April, where through the Ministry of Gender and Youth, the government had called us to a consultative process where we were informed of the government's decision to look into the ratification of this convention. And as CSOs, this meeting convened very abruptly with really not much to the agenda. And because of that, we had requested that we come back to the government on our views. This happened on the 8th of May. We noted that the process really did not allow for a lot of reflection and also for us to equip ourselves and capacitate ourselves for a response. Nonetheless, we were able to provide a response to our government through the same ministry, and this happened on the 8th of May. In May, we had highlighted the very same issues of procedural irregularities. So this was in relation to the time constraints that CSOs were given, the nature of the convening, because it did not also involve a large group of feminists or women, members of the community at large. It also was not preceded by any sort of prior conversations to allow for a bit more enlightenment and sensitization. So we came into the process with a lot of shortfalls, specifically around procedure and around public participation. And I think it is quite similar to what my colleagues have previously mentioned. However, when we did come back to the table, we provided a statement that highlighted, and it was also ratified by 10 core CSOs and 50 more others who are not part of the core team. And we highlighted the experiences that we had as CSOs. We also looked at the substantive gaps around the definition. Some of them have already been mentioned, so I won't go into that. So family, the issue of girls and women, and the current definition also excluding transgender women, non-binary people, gender-expansive youth, and therefore perpetuating patriarchal norms. We also highlighted the fact that femicide in our country is a huge problem, and because it omits intention, it also fails to outline drivers or contexts around femicide. So we recommended adopting definitions that were perhaps UN Women or WHO definitions, which covered also intimate dowry-related trafficking, honor killings, femicide in workplaces, schools, femicides in refugee camps, and also online spaces where femicide was an end result of abuse. We also looked at harmful practices and required that there needed to be a much broader inclusion of what harmful practices looked like in today's society. That meant that we needed clear definitions. So it had to cover discriminatory customs, religious practices, social norms that also cause physical, psychological, or economic harm. I think for us as a country, noting that we are a dualistic country, so meaning that we have to domesticate before it even becomes a law or legislation enforceable in this country, meant that we must realize that having an additional convention that is weak is very problematic. It will be problematic not only from the fact that it is not easily enforceable, but secondly because the route to domesticating it is going to be even more lengthened. We highlight that in Botswana, although we are a party to the Maputo Protocol, we are still fighting for its domestication. And this is many, many years, over 2 decades later. So we stress that ratification must be accompanied by stronger protections aligned with instruments such as the Maputo Protocol and SADC model law. In fact, our call is simply to pause and to focus on the laws that we still need to domesticate, like the Maputo Protocol and also our much awaited Gender-Based Violence Act, which is going to be aligned to the SADC model law. We are also looking at our constitutional gap. We've gone through constitutional processes which have not quite come to completion, and we are calling also for robust strengthening of our constitutional framework so that the rights of women and girls can first be protected from a constitutional lens before it's taken down. And maybe as final words, just because I'm cautious to time, part of the other substantive gaps were that when we looked at the definition of human rights, women and girl human rights defenders, it really did not cover the entire grouping of women and girl rights defenders. And this definition needed to be broadened, and it needed to be broadened to include also informal groups. It needed to ensure also we recognize girls and women who are also in undocumented situations, defenders who also come from stateless backgrounds, defenders who are also from non-government or public sector spaces. So the definition needs to be broadened, and it needs to reflect the reality on the ground. We highlighted also that there needs to be a closer look at violence in the world of work, because the definition, it seems to fail to outline and define vast, diverse range of occupations that women are involved in, with a high concentration in service, care-oriented and professional sectors. We also looked at the fact that there were specific legislation requirements and enforcement oversight mechanisms that also needed to be created. We also highlighted that there's also a need to reflect on budgetary concerns, and similarly to what my sister from Uganda had mentioned, the issue of accountability and the issue of then ensuring that there's proper data collection needs to be taken into consideration so that it can be effective. So in summary, our main concern is that this treaty is not fit for purpose. It is also not ready for its ratification in this state. Ratification and then looking for amendment is also a dire problem, because there is serious time constraints, again, political constraints when we speak to amendment after ratification. Our concern right now is also the resourcing. So those who are pushing for the ratification really come from the well-resourced side, which is the government, who are also who have the means, whereas the civil society organizations are really struggling to ensure that we are capacitated to even push for proper dialogue and push for proper pushback so that we can stop and pause and then come back to the table. So the reality is that we really cannot allow for ratification until the amendments are done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mona Lisa, for your contributions. Coming up next, we have Brenda. She's the director of Wise for Africa, and she will bring the conversation closer to home. She will connect it to she will connect the conversation to the national context and the developments within the South African context, and basically talk to us about why regional instruments should build upon and not dilute existing norms, and some of the context of the developments of what's happening in South Africa. Brenda, may I ask that you limit your contribution to 5 minutes? We're a bit running out of time, and we're also trying to keep time for engagement at the end. Thank you so much.
No problem. of the conversation. Achim was coming with a legal analysis.
Yeah.
And then
Because China started with the chemical substance, right?
no, that was just like the example that is stated in the legal analysis.
So I hear you. You want to go through these ones. I was actually looking at this now. That might be easier to see the next.
He was still
Yeah, I
saying
see.
that it was
I
very
hear you. So
yeah.
from here,
Almost got nothing.
not all. My thing. Okay, so I'm just gonna say that the next two speakers will focus on like thematic issues.
No,
And
because
women
then
in
we are
African
fracturing it
development.
now. Because Brenda has come here and she's making the case
I hear you.
because she's identifying Mona Lisa between the countries. So it's very important for women to be in the context.
But now this one.
Yeah, this one is just like now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so just let it continue then.
Okay. Because now we have
These two.
Mary.
Yeah.
And then again. But again, she's
Women and girls who are diverse in all material respects. And there are strong similarities between this campaign that we are embarking on the convention, and what we working on in South Africa, or the not fit for purpose, right? And the connection between the two is that we don't want a convention that's going to erode and whittle down the gains that have been made with the work that has been done in South Africa over the years. And we don't want to, and many other African countries, to come to a point where they now say this convention is not fit for purpose, because we can give you a lived reality of why we believe that the kind of structure that has been put in place as a form to coordinate and demand accountability and leadership across all spheres of government, across society, is not fit for purpose, and that we are being forced again as activists, as gender specialists, as legal practitioners, to really look at why is it that there is a concerted effort to downgrade or belittle or diminish, and in the end normalize giving us little bit when we ask for bigger things. And why is it when it comes to issues of gender equality and addressing gender-based violence in its totality, and looking at the lived experiences of women and girls, there's a pushback on that. And so for me is that in this press conference, the message that we are sending to everyone listening and beyond is that stop trying to appease and stop being performative, right? Start to make these conventions or these policy instruments that you design to be meaningful to the populace, right? And hear the voices of those who are guiding you and assisting you to shape a convention or a policy or a law that is going to give substantive results and the consequences of those that it makes life easier for many young women and girls. So it's about our existence, it's about our humanity, and we need to center that existence and humanity. So yes, don't rush to ratify this convention, because what it does, it takes away the little gains that we have made, the strides that we've made in advancing substantive gender equality in South Africa. And we want all of you to not get excited about a convention being passed, but not fully giving us what we're looking for. So we support the arguments made on not consulting fully and extensively and crowding out those voices, because all that you wanted was to stand up and say, finally we have a convention, but not looked at the genesis of how you got there, and literally taking away certain important provisions that would have advanced us quicker and better and substantively so. So yes, let's not get to a point where we're going to
have a convention that is not going to be fit for purpose, and we are not going to acquiesce to a convention that is not fit for purpose, and that's why we are putting up the fight in South Africa on a piece of legislation that is also taking away the gains that we've made that is not fit for purpose. So I'm hoping that in the engagement I can expand more, but thank you for this time and opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. In the next 5 minutes, we have Mary Da Silva. She is the co-founder of the African Initiative of Women Human Rights Defenders, and she will provide us with some highlights, right, of how the convention deals with the issue of women human rights defenders, why the legal protections matter, and why ambiguity in the definition of who is a women human rights defender can weaken protection. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you. A thumbs up if you can hear me properly. And good afternoon, everyone. So I'll begin by saying what women human rights defenders are doing across Africa. They are holding the line. They confront authoritarianism, they expose corruption, they defend land and communities, they accompany survivors and demand justice. For doing this, they are surveilled, they are criminalized, they are sexually violated, digitally attacked, economically punished, forcibly displaced, disappeared and killed. Now this convention should be a shield for these defenders. But currently, what we have seen is that this shield has gaps, and gaps leaves the body exposed. Article 1 defines a woman and girls human rights defender as a national of a state party who acts individually or collectively to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms. The recognition that women defend all human rights is significant, but the words, a national of a state party, create a dangerous exclusion. What happens to the defender forced to flee because her own state is persecuting her? What happens to the refugee, asylum seeker, stateless activist, migrant defender, or woman continuing her work from exile? Does crossing a border erase her identity as a defender? These are key questions that we should ask. Article 7 protects displaced, refugee, asylum-seeking and stateless women and girls generally, but it does not expressly protect them as women human rights defenders. The political nature of the attacks against them may therefore remain invisible. Article 11 requires states to strengthen and engage with and protect women and girl human rights defenders and women's organizations. Yet it links this obligation to their role in preventing and ending violence against women and girls. This could narrow the protection promised by the broader definition. What about the women exposing electoral fraud? The women challenging corruption? The women defending environmental justice, digital freedom, labor rights, or displaced communities? These defenders also experience gender attacks because they are women challenging power. Their protection cannot depend on whether a state categorizes their work as ending violence against women and girls. This creates ambiguity within the treaty. Ambiguity is not neutral. Where states are themselves responsible for attacks, ambiguity can become an instrument of repression. The convention also fails to define what it means to strengthen, engage with, and protect defenders. It does not require independent, adequately resourced protection mechanisms for women human rights defenders. It provides no clear standards for risk assessment, emergency relocation, flexible funding, livelihood continuity, safe return, reintegration, or long-term accompaniment. Nor does it expressly prohibit reprisals against defenders who engage with human rights mechanisms. It names protection without building its architecture. Although the convention recognizes physical, sexual, psychological, economic, and digital harm, it does not explicitly address judicial harassment, arbitrary arrest, surveillance, doxing, sexualized disinformation, travel restrictions, asset freezing, organizational deregistration of the misuse of public order and counterterrorism laws, which are the lived realities of women human rights defenders today. What is not clearly named can be denied or deliberately misclassified. So if you are not going to name the misuse of public order, counterterrorism laws, and all the other harms that come to women human rights defenders, then it can easily be denied. The convention also focuses heavily on the individual victim. Yet attacks against women human rights defenders often extend to their children, their partners, colleagues, organizations, communities, and movements. This is integrated harm intended to dismantle collective resistance. What we are doing here today is collective resistance, and the failure to recognize us in that context is harm. Protection must therefore safeguard not only individual bodies, but also livelihoods, families, organizations, and movements. This convention also does not explain how protection will remain independent when police, military, intelligence services, or other state authorities are implicated. A defender cannot be expected to seek safety from the same institution persecuting her. We at the African Initiative of Women Human Rights Defender, being a women defender-led African-rooted transnational care network, we believe that our lived practices tells us that protection cannot be narrow, reactive, fragmented, or confined by borders. Women human rights defenders, their initiatives and their movements must remain safe, they must remain visible, they must remain resourced, connected, and in motion. This convention carries historic promise to the extent that many are actually celebrating the fact that it has come into existence. But recognition is not protection, and a shield with gaps is not enough. No defender must be excluded, no harm rendered invisible, and no state permitted to hide behind ambiguity. Women human rights defenders need stronger legal guarantees and not weaker ones, as we are seeing in this convention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Our last speaker for today is Ramotolai Jallo. She works with SIHA Network, and she will be speaking to us with a focus on how the convention is addressing conflict-related sexual violence. Over to you, Ramo, but again, 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Everyone, and happy to keep this to 5 minutes. And also really thrilled to come after Mary, because I think that we have a lot of different intersections. So let me just jump right in. SIHA Network, we are a feminist organization, a regional feminist organization that works across the Horn of Africa, a region that is rampant with military flows, armed flows, and protracted conflicts that have been taking place for across large periods of time. So just looking at the common denominators across the region quickly, we're looking at a lot of targeted violence, whether it's against women, girls, and also women activists, medical practitioners, and frontline responders, women human rights defenders, who are targeted by armed actors across all stages of conflict. And different forms are being leveraged in terms of putting across or subjecting women and girls to violence, typically being conflict-related sexual violence used as a tool to repress and terrorize communities and women who are standing as pillars for resilience and cohesion within their communities, as these communities are withstanding backlash and heinous conflict. There's also rampant cycles of impunity where perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence and violence against women and girls are emboldened and continue to re-traumatize communities day after day, year after year, outside the purviews of justice and accountability. So there are huge failures there. Also, there are critical gaps in terms of healthcare, providing sexual reproductive health services, psychosocial support. This is few and far in between in conflict settings all across the Horn. We also see the use of humanitarian blockades where armed conflict parties are actually weaponizing the provision of humanitarian assistance and using the restrictions around food as weapons of war and starvation, as we've seen in the case of Sudan, for instance. So there's so many roots and root causes and drivers to this, from the flows, militarization, intersectional identities, cultural, religious fundamentalism, ethnic dimensions. And so across the board and across the continent, there is need for adaptive protective pathways, whether we are ensuring that women and girls are able to go about their daily lives, whether you are a woman in the informal sector and you're a vendor. Do you have protection as you're meeting your station of work? As a young girl who's going to school in a conflict-affected region, do you have specialized protective pathways for you to arrive at your destination safely? We need comprehensive health care, we need legal access and accountability, and we also need women leadership. Women who are facing the onslaught of these violations are also in the perfect position to lead and say what it is that they need in the context of peace processes, transitional justice processes, and within the political participation sphere, so looking at the government. And so with that in mind, and in bringing that snapshot of the conflict zone here, we look at Article 7 of the Convention, which we think, from the context of SIHA, is a real missed opportunity for enforced protection. First, we look at the weak and vague language that is used across the section, and it only mirrors the language that is used across the convention more broadly. Article 7.1 talks about taking cognizance rather than building terms that actually create state obligations and that give rights to the women and girls that need it. And so there is no leverage that people can use from provisions that are couched in that manner. Another issue is that there's actually no explicit mention of conflict-related sexual violence, and this goes to the earlier points that were made by Achen in the sort of weaknesses that we see in the definition frames of the convention as well. And with the issue that is so rife across my region and across the continent, that is a serious opportunity missed. We also see the absence of survivor participation. So again, we want women who are facing the onslaught to be leading the remedies in terms of peace building, transitional justice, peace processes, and this is painfully absent in terms of the wording and commitment to this in Article 7. Again, and as Mary has already mentioned, which is critical, there is no mention of the protections for women human rights defenders in Article 7, and you only have to look at contexts such as Somalia, such as Uganda, to see the real weaponization of violence used against women rights defenders, journalists, service providers who are speaking out against violence and are being punished for it. So without protections of that manner in Article 7, that is a serious gap. Additionally, there's nothing that talks about the structural drivers of conflict. Yes, it talk about intersectional vulnerabilities that are faced by women. There's mention of older women, widows, women who are displaced, etc. But really addressing what the structural drivers are in relation to ethnicity, in relation to arms flow, the like, that's absolutely missing from the section and needs to be addressed. Additionally, again, shortfalls around femicide, but also shortfalls in not mentioning issues around forced marriage or FGM. Somaliland, the Somali region has 98% of women who have been subjected to FGM. So that is a serious gap in terms of Article 7 and the broader convention when we talk about needing to lead from African experiences. Additionally, we look at a very important point which has been mentioned time and time again across the day, which is that there is a missed normative integration from the perspective of peace and security, we have the Maputo Protocol, we have the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, we have the AU guidelines on combating sexual violence and its consequences in Africa. Very extensive normative frameworks, and there is the failure to integrate the language that are in these instruments into the convention that we have. So this is where we stand in terms of Article 7. There are critical gaps that need to be addressed, and so we stand with this campaign in calling for a pause for purpose in order to strengthen the provisions of the convention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramo. We really appreciate the reflections that you provided on Article 7 of the Convention. She was our last speaker, so we open now the floor for questions from the media, from journalists. I will ask that you provide us with like your name and the media house that you are from. Both in person and online, you are more than welcome to. Online participants, you may use the chat box, but if you feel like you want to voice out your questions, also just raise your hand. Our team online will be giving you the mic to speak. Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm just hitting
Sorry, can you go again?
Yes. No, I was just saying thank you so much, Ramo, for the highlights that you've given on Article 7. We are moving now for Q&A for media, in person as well as online. For online media personnel, please just state your name and the media house that you are from, whether you're in South Africa or in the continent. Just let us know where you are based. And raise your hand. The team online will give you the permission, to allow you to unmute and speak or ask your question. Thank you. Acheng, would you please help us with voicing out any questions that we are having in the chat, if any?
It's mostly reflections. We do not have any questions in the chat yet. Thank you.
Thank you. And our journalists in the room, if you have any questions, follow-ups, please feel free. All right. So it seems that we don't have questions at the moment, but again, we are free to provide any further information that is needed after the press conference. Just also to highlight that we have a webinar that is happening today at 6 p.m. where we will have more time to discuss CVOG, the convention, the gaps, the challenges, and the points of review that is needed in the convention in more, in depth. So that's also an opportunity to kind of learn more about the convention. Okay, so the next steps are coming up now as I'm closing. Just let me start by saying thank you to all the speakers that have joined us online and the media persons that we have in the room as well. We really appreciate the time that you've taken. The presentations that were given to us online reflected the diverse regional expectations, but they also revealed a remarkable consistency in the concerns being raised across the continent. We've heard the legal analysis, we've heard evidence from national consultation, we've also heard from human rights defenders' perspective, as well as the conflict settings. Together, these perspectives reinforce one central message. There is a broad support for ending violence against women and girls on the continent, but serious concerns are that the convention in its current form requires further strengthening. It is important that today's conversation is not misunderstood. Again, we are not campaigning against ending violence against women and girls.
We are campaigning against weaker protections. We are not campaigning against a continental convention. We actually want one, but we want one that is fit for purpose, a convention that reflects the decades of women and feminist advocacy, a convention that strengthens existing protections, a convention that future generations can rely upon with confidence. And this is coming up to the next step. On Saturday, the 25th of July, just around the corner, the Pan-African Parliament will be hosting a high-level dialogue on this convention. As the main legislative organ of the African Union, the Parliament has a responsibility not to merely promote legal instruments, but really to scrutinize them carefully and ensure that they strengthen rather than weaken Africa's human rights framework. We therefore urge the Parliament to ensure that all perspectives are heard, including those of women's rights organizations, feminist movements, legal experts, survivors, and civil society organizations who have raised substantive concerns about the convention. Our asks remain clear. We call on the African Union and member states to first pause the ratification process temporarily, undertake meaningful consultation with feminist movements, women's rights organizations, and legal experts, and to revise the convention to address the legal and human rights concerns that are raised, as well as to strengthen the convention so that it reinforces rather than undermines the Maputo Protocol and the existing human rights architecture that we have on the African level, as well as the standards that are internationally accepted. We need to ensure that a transparent and evidence-based decision-making takes place before encouraging member states to ratify. Looking ahead, today's press conference is only one part of a broader conversation. Again, on 25th of July, Saturday, we have women's rights organizations, African feminists, survivors, legal experts, and allies will gather outside the Pan-African Parliament to call for a stronger convention and a more inclusive process at 8:30 p.m. just before the panel on the domestication and ratification of the convention takes place. We hope that today's discussion contributes to an informed public debate and encourages decision makers to engage seriously with the concerns that we have raised. In closing, ending violence against women and girls is far too important for us to settle for anything less than the strongest possible legal framework. History will not judge us by how quickly we ratify a convention. It will judge us by whether that treaty truly protected the women and girls it was intended to serve. That is why our message is simple. We want them to pause, listen, revise, strengthen, and then ratify. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to the media for helping. There's questions? Aha, okay. After all my closing, there's questions. All right, we'll take questions then.
Well, the first question is what do we have to do to help the process as NGOs? And the second question is, so there's a pressure on them, I think that means member states, to sign the convention so that they can also push for violence against women and girls, or push against violence against women and girls at national level. How do you assure them that they should not sign due to the fear, but rather call for a revision of the convention? So how do you help member states that are confused in this process? They want to do well by signing.
Okay, and the first question was, okay, for the second question, can you say it on the mic or it's on the chat?
It's there on the chat.
Okay, for the second question around how do we engage with member states, one approach that we have agreed to go through with the Pause for Purpose campaign is that we try to engage in political engagement. We approach member states, we approach parliamentarians, and we are trying to also approach, the AUC representatives of member states in Addis Ababa as well. There's been some challenges, of course, of access. Most of the times with civil society organizations, there's a bit of difficulty in accessing those spaces, but we try and engage with them through briefings. We try to make it as simple as possible for them why there's no progress that is like brought forward by the convention, especially when you look at what is available at the national level. What are the constitutional protections? For example, within the Kenya example that our colleague Acheng has highlighted, there was a call for a memorandum, right, from civil society perspectives. So there was organizing among civil society organizations in Kenya, and they came together to submit a memorandum to the government telling them that there is no urgency to ratify because at the national level, we actually have stronger protections than the ones being proposed by the convention, for example. In fact, the convention will actually take us back. And we understand that in international law, when it comes to conventions and treaties, they need to be the ones setting the benchmark. They need to have the highest standards of protections so that the national level can actually aspire and work towards meeting these obligations. It shouldn't be the other way around. And this is why we keep saying that the convention, if ratified with its current format and the current content that is within the convention, it will actually weaken rather than strengthen the protections. So one of the strategies is to engage with member states through briefings, inviting them to meetings, meeting with the ministers of gender, for example. These are all approaches of how we can clarify to member states that the ratification should not just be symbolic. You don't get an award. The first to ratify or amongst the 5 top countries to ratify. It's really more about what protections are provided. For the first question, I actually forgot, so maybe can someone just let me know what the first question was? Acheng?
Yes, the first question was, let me just pull it up. What do we have to do to help the process as NGOs?
Okay, as NGOs, I would urge you to join the Post for Purpose campaign. The more we are united, the more likely that we will achieve our goal, the more likely that the AU and member states would listen to us. They would know that this is not coming from one context, this is not coming from one NGO, this is coming from civil society organizations across the continent who are working on these issues, who understand the gaps and understand the needs that women are urgently asking for in terms of protection against violence on the continent. We urge you to join the Post for Purpose campaign. My colleagues will be sharing on the chat box the website that we have developed. You will find the resources, you will find how we can engage, the different strategies that we have, that we are approaching, civil society mobilization, knowledge production, engagement, political engagement, for example. So I would say that that would be a starting point, but at national levels, as NGOs engaging with their governments, most of the times these kind of steps are taken without proper consultation with civil society organizations. So be vigilant, engage with your governments, and take and seize the opportunities that present themselves for you to engage actually and raise awareness at the national level within the civil society movement, but at the same time targeting the governments as well. Thank you. Any other question? No question on the chat box? Okay, so it's safe to say that we have reached the end of this press conference. Thank you again. I will go back to my concluding remarks. You've already heard it. The message is clear: pause, listen, revise, strengthen, then ratify. Thank you so much for everyone who was attending in person, and thank you so much to our speakers and the participants online. We appreciate you. Stay vigilant and push. Continue to push. Thank you so much.